Hi there, this is Tony English once again. Today I want to talk about a proof for the existence of God that's kind of fun, a little bit different. I wouldn't call it a normal proof because it's one to easily avoid by just not thinking. You don't engage the proof, you don't go through it honestly, and you won't have an issue with it. But if you do engage it, it's very simple, but the only conclusion you can come to is God exists. And it's called the ontological argument for the existence of God. So let's get into it. The thing is, you have to understand a couple concepts. One is something that's logically true or false, something that's contingently true or false, or something that's incoherent. So incoherence is like a married bachelor, square circle, the sweetness of blue. Basically words that mean nothing. They're incoherent. They don't mean anything. Contingent means something that's possibly true, may or may not be true. It is possible that it's true, it's possible that it's false. That's contingent. Necessary means that it has to exist and it cannot not exist. Okay, so given that foundation, let's talk about the ontological argument. And really, it's an ontological means, by definition, God exists. So it would be like, by his very nature, he must exist, therefore he exists. This causes a lot of problems for philosophers. It was basically debunked. It was invented in like the year the 9th or 10th century by Anselm. And his version of it, basically, the philosophers could extinguish by using clear thinking philosophy. But lately, more philosophers have come out with a different version of it. Alvin Plantinga and some others that I think it really works. So, sorry for that boring introduction, but let's jump into it. Basically, if you define God as the greatest logically possible being, then he must exist, and here's why. First, let's talk about possible worlds. Okay, so when I talk about a possible, or when they talk about a possible world, they're not talking about worlds that might exist somewhere else, likely to exist. It means logically possible. So if you take all the worlds that logically possibly could exist, every world like this with slight changes, other worlds, all the logically possible worlds, as opposed to incoherent worlds that cannot exist, then that's what we're talking about, logically possible worlds. So if you accept the definition that God is the greatest logically possible being, then he must exist, and this is why. He has to exist. If it's logically possible that he exists, then he must exist, because if he exists in one of the other worlds, logically, and I'm not talking about actually, I'm talking about if it's possible for him to exist in a logically possible world somewhere, then he must exist in all of them, because if he only exists in one possible world but not all of them, then he's not logically the greatest possible being. To be the logically greatest possible being, you must exist in every possible world, including the real one. So this argument is very simple, but if you think about it and you engage it, you have to come to the conclusion that God exists. Now, there's many different arguments against it, because people say, well, what about, I can prove a logically perfect island exists or tiger exists, but those are all subjective. They're not objective. Like a logically possible being, the greatest possible being would be one that has all knowledge, all power, existence within itself, himself, herself. This being would have the maximal of every category, including morals, including love, all the great making principles or issues in the world. They would have that as part of their character. So if it's logically possible that they exist, then they must. It's because this is the thing. They can't, if they only existed in one or two or some worlds, then that would be a contingent being. And a contingent being isn't maximally great. A contingent being is partially great. And they would not be maximal. So, and they can't, and also they can't be incoherent. The only way to destroy this argument is to claim that a maximally great being is incoherent, because they can't be contingent. The only thing left is either necessary or incoherent. So if you engage this argument, you have to actually, it puts the onus on the atheist to prove that a logically great maximal being is incoherent. So because if they're not incoherent, they can't be contingent, they have to be necessary, and necessary means they exist in every possible world. For instance, like, it's not, there's a fancy word called epistemology, which means knowledge, how we know things, or that we know things. So if we're talking about, for all we know, God exists, or for all we know, he doesn't exist, that's epistemology. And that's like saying a fancy mathematical equation, for all we know, it's accurate because we're not mathematicians, or for all we know, it's not. It may or may not be. But if it is true, then it's necessarily true. Like, all math that is true is necessarily true. It's true in every possible world. So 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a necessary truth in any possible world. So we're not talking about, for all I know, God exists. We're talking about, you got to keep focusing on logically possible. So if he's the greatest possible being, he has to exist in every possible world, which includes the real world. And people will say, an island or a tiger is maximally great. They must exist. No, that's for all I know. That's subjective. That's what makes a great lion: bigger, more powerful, smarter, more beautiful. It's hard. It's all subjective. So those arguments against this ontological argument is they fail. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. All right, thanks. Bye.